Traditionally, software relies a lot on code review, where a lot of your peers is gonna nitpick your code, maybe not just for style, but like whether it covers edge cases or is like a good architecture for the desired workload. But for this type of new software, that code review don't exist anymore, right? Because you don't critique other people's problems. Like maybe it's better for the next model, you don't know, right? So our thesis is really like code review is gonna be very much like data review. You're listening to Data Renegades, a regular series where we discuss data, code, culture, and everything in between. We interview pioneers of tools and concepts we now use every day in the data world. These ideas often started as experimental projects or unconventional approaches. The builders are renegades who are inspiring and shaping the industry. Data Renegades is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in enterprise infrastructure. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you would like to suggest a topic, find us on datarenegades.com. Welcome to Data Renegades, where we interview a bunch of renegades who at that time was probably starting off some new framework or new abstraction that profoundly impact our industry. We wanted to bring this experience and this thought leaders to the audience where that inspire people to build more things or test or advance where like the whole industry.
But today is going to be a little more self-serving than that.
Yeah.
As it's our first podcast that CL and I are recording. So we're going to be talking to each other. Maybe a little bit more of a, again, self-serving of us being we're renegades for ourselves. But, you know, starting somewhere. CL, why don't you start off by giving a little more bio about yourself so our listeners know why they should care and tune in?
Yeah, of course. I grew up as a competitive programmer and got into open source back in the day, like building web application, contributing to like Apache, the web server, which is the most popular one at the time. And then for the past 20 years, I've been doing mostly developer infrastructure tooling, work on one of the earliest decentralized version control system, predate Git, that was used by Apple and a couple of big companies at that time. It was open source. We didn't really commercialize that, but we were playing in the kind of the frontier of like how developer experience should be in the modern days. And then if you were old enough to use an old like version control system, it's very hard for a non-committer contributor to work with an open source project. So that's when I felt the pain myself and decided that, we need a better tool that allows more people to contribute to software in a more ergonomic way. So from there, I got kind of involved in a pretty global open source community, moved to the UK to work for a couple of years. And then, where was I?
You start off with the move to Europe, which I always thought was such an interesting part of your story, especially now, you know, we both live here in San Francisco in the Bay. And it always seems when you introduce somebody like, to me, like Jose, right? That it's like, oh yeah, I met them in London. Like, oh yeah, we jammed on this over in Germany. It's really cool.
Yeah. So actually, the move to the US last year was actually with a lot of help from my old friends at that time when we meet like around the world, like just hacking on open source stuff. But kind of fast forward to like why I'm doing the data related things or tooling today is in 2012, I started a civic tech community back in Taiwan, trying to see if we can adopt the things that we learn from open source community to organize people, not just technical background, but interdisciplinary, that cares about democracy and then how modern society should function through the help of data and technology. And so from there, the first project was actually like budget visualization, because understanding budget is kind of a way that you participate in democracy. And at the time, of course, like there's published PDF, but it's really hard to comprehend if you don't know what the terminologies are.
As someone who's worked on government PDFs when I was at the SF Fed, you know exactly what you mean. Yep.
Yeah. And then how do you like engage the general public with that, right? So you got to turn the data into something people can to feel that they're connected to the data. What does it mean? Does it connect to a local improvement project that's in my neighborhood. So that was kind of that initial project in the civic tech community. And then that's where I started to work on a lot of like budget data or legislation data. And then at the time, of course, there's no LLM yet. So processing all those data is kind of pretty tedious. And then we work using pretty traditional like ad hoc data pipeline. And I was already feeling.
Wait, at the risk of aging you, ground us. What year was this?
So it's 2012. Yeah.
Got it.
It's 2012. And then so back to where we are, it's like, okay, so working with all this data is usually you have some ad hoc script, like trying to transform the data in one way or another. So I was like exploring, are there a better way to do it at that time? So I created like a Postgres extension that essentially it's doing data modeling within Postgres that turn like relational data into a REST server within Postgres. So at the time it's called Postgres or PG REST. And then I think there's another version of that nowadays being supported by Supabase.
That is all awesome. It's very technical. So why don't you explain that a little more layman terms about what were the benefits of doing that method over others at that time in 2012?
Okay, so in the old days of like working with data from web application, as we often tell each other that SaaS is basically a database wrapper, right? You have all this like CRUD, as in create, update and replace and delete functions wrapping around a database. So traditionally in web development or software, you have something called ORM, object relationship modeling, that you turn the records in database into a representation in software stack that you can manipulate. And then often that works in a client server way that the browser talks to a web server that operates on certain records, right? And then so you can see that how you as an end user use a web browser to talk to a certain backend that talks to a database. This is a kind of very traditional web app. So by combining that ORM layer, which is the server-side software understanding of the data and the database together, that's kind of reducing that very thin layer of wrapping and then like unnecessary code at a time. So it was like exploring if that's a good practice where you have data already modeled in the database, and then you define some mapping that turns into a web server, so REST response that you can have the front end operate on in the database directly.
So in this case, it would be you're taking the PDFs, you're transitioning them into the database, and then making it surfaceable where people can then just hit a REST API for different web apps.
Yes.
In order to do that.
Yeah. So that's the time where I'm starting to feel maybe there's like new, better way to do data. Shouldn't be so many like ad hoc script, like maintaining the data or ingesting new data. And of course, fast forward, we have like the so-called modern data stack. You have scalable warehouses that separate compute and storage. And you have all this tooling for ingestion, transformation, and then like modern BI tools. But when we think about that, the development cycle is still pretty brittle, as in like you model something. Now it's great that you have like a code first way, such as dbt or SQL mesh. Code first meaning that it's declarative. You can finally put it in CI/CD and test it in a way that generates a separate database and then compare results. So that is a great advance in the ergonomics for data development already.
Mm-hmm.
So what's missing here is really like, how do you know that thing your new logic produce is actually correct? And oftentimes, I learned from working with civic tech data is like data is just a bunch of facts there. How they're meaningful, or how they're interpreted, it's really someone with domain knowledge that knows what this means or what that has an impact about.
Yeah. And in the case of GovZero, it's not just like, what impact does it have? It's then helping people translate to why does this matter to me?
Exactly.
Making it personal. So then they're really getting engaged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 In the GovZero era is really thinking about how do we empower more, either they're a technical background person not working with so much data, or someone who's from a particular NGO that knows a certain issue and then wants to equip themselves with like use of data to be more convincing to their audience. So that community has grown into 13,000 on Slack and working on like hundreds of projects.
How many corrupt politicians have they caught at this point?
Yeah, there was like a pretty prominent project like doing campaign finance digitization. As in, campaign finance was a very important part of like how money impact politics, right? So it used to be like on paper, or actually they have digital records, but they don't publish that. And you have to go into a particular building to print it out. So there was a GovZero project that mobilized like 30 people to go in there every day and then just like print out, go to the print shop next door and put it on Google Drive, right? And then we didn't do an OCR at that time, but instead, like our friend like Ronnie turned it into a captcha GAN, as in like, tabular data, and then you can do some really basic image processing and turn it into per cell into a captcha GAN that calls people that, hey, just help save democracy by digitizing this thing. So it's not that we can't do OCR, but this creates immense engagement from the public.
It's community building at the same time as loading the data.
Yeah. So there are like 10,000 people trying to fix democracy by typing numbers, and then within 24 hours, we clear like 300,000 records for the first batch.
How did you get all those initial people engaged? I mean, this is something that I know we're thinking a lot about internally at Recu too, is how do we build community?
Yeah.
And this is an incredible community. I mean, very different message, save democracy versus, make sure your data is validated, is accurate in context.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, like when we started, it was like a tiny hackathon. Like we were thinking about maybe 30 people would care about this. And then just suddenly there's like over 100 people every time that people want to bring kind of their struggle, bring their passion issue to the community because they know they will find someone there and then collaboratively like solve something. I got a lot of inspiration from the open source community that people go there and then build things, right? It's not just thinking about potential solutions. It's just like start prototyping things. That made that a very unique community. It's lots of great people. Even if they have very different point of view, they can collaborate on the facts that's kind of in between this different point of view. But how do we, from that learning, it's really, there's like a manifesto we work on pretty early, right? It's like, basically don't ask why something hasn't been done because you're the reason that hasn't been done.
Yeah, no, because you're the one to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Go out there and build. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's like embracing this open source way that we ask people to come share about what you care about, and then you don't have to like commit your full life into changing politics, but this is the way you contribute, and then by kind of the way that open source works, this accumulates. If we produce artifacts from time to time, improve upon each other's artifacts.
Yeah. And in a nonpartisan way too, because this is just making sure funds are appropriated, that people understand what the use is.
Right.
Too. So you can really bring people in and find that common ground too.
Yeah. And there are a lot of like passion project about like illegal factory on foreign land. Can we have like a crowdsourced way reporting that, and then some NGOs step in to be kind of the reporting entity that actually report this illegal building to the government and then track them, right? So it's kind of a very interesting multi-stakeholder way that people want to solve problems, and then here they assemble, and then yeah.
Before we get into kind of the next chapter, if people want to know more about GovZero, where can they go find out?
So there's a website called govzero.tw, is like g0v.tw, and I believe there are like English on that as well. So yeah.
Cool. All right. Now into the next chapter. Okay, so we have talked about how you first really got into data, your background with competitive programming, building out version control pre-Git, which as somebody who has only ever used Git for my version control, I literally could not imagine. When we were first talking about it, I just had not even thought about, oh, of course there'd be other version control systems. Like, yeah. So how'd you get into Recu? What was that next step like after GovZero?
Prior to Recu, there was another startup I started that's doing machine learning operations. And then at that time was a previous GPU boom where like people are starting buying GPU and then trying to apply deep learning to various traditional ML problem. And then that product we built is like a data science workbench that for a mid-sized team that can share the environment, make sure they have the same version of library, allocate GPU and all that. And then the product was used by some of the largest companies in the world and then some banks in Taiwan. So that's kind of also on a mission where I was thinking like the software engineering practice at that time, like applying to data science or machine learning, it's still pretty like there's a gap in there. Like you probably know that people will like the data science will throw code to MLE to kind of re-implement the whole thing, and when it's in production, everything is monitored differently.
MLE being machine learning engineers.
Yeah. So that was an attempt to solve that problem, but we found out that the startup was like solving too big a problem that spread is very thin because the entire machine learning kind of life cycle is like, well, there's data you have ingestion, cleaning.
There's problems everywhere
Yeah.
at every step of
Yeah.
that issue.
Exactly.
Yeah. So a classic founder trap of we have a big vision, we have multiple problems, and we want to solve all of them.
Yeah. So I think that was the time where I found, okay, like, because it started very naive. Like, okay, the development experience for this new type of software that we probably call software 2.0 at that time. Now in the agentic world, it's software 3.0, right? So what's the new collaboration abstraction for software 2.0? And then we talked about Git and then GitHub, right? But if you think about like Git started like 2005, right? And then GitHub was like 2008. And then it is very interesting progression as in like there's new abstraction that's created core to our current developer cycle. As in, for example, pull requests, right? Before pull requests, you basically have very tedious way to do branching and merging. And then pull requests enable that, but more importantly, it's an abstraction that enabled the DevOps practice to be not just a best practice, but like ready products can be integrated into your workflow, like Circle CI or all the different CI/CD tools.
Mm-hmm.
So that important abstraction is, I think, crucial to like the current developer workflow for traditional software. And then we're missing that abstraction for the new type of software that we're building.
For 3.0.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 2.0, version control is rolling out there, DevOps has now grown. For the software 3.0, what are we missing? What is the ops?
Yeah.
Is it ops? Is it something
all right,
else?
let's first maybe define this a little bit. Like when we say software 1.0, it's like you basically code up all the logic, right? And then software 2.0, by definition, is like you have a machine learning model that learns from the data. So you have your software's logic partially dictated by a machine learning model that maybe makes recommendations, certain automation. So that encompasses a large amount of the logic that this program will actually operate, right? And then the challenge for software 2.0 is like managing data, managing that training workload, and then managing that models monitoring and all that. And then when we talk about software 3.0, it's like, well, things are partially built by LLM and then also invoking LLM as part of the core logic. Like traditionally, you have like a backend API. What if you don't write the backend API's actual code? You just have a natural language saying, well, this API should load this person and then find their past 10 purchases and so on.
I'm really creating something non-deterministic.
Yes.
I think that's, for me, when I think about 2.0 versus 3.0, not necessarily like all of the models themselves are deterministic, but when we talk about LLMs, you're not going to get the same output no matter if you put the same input in over and over again. And that's something when I've thought about data models is one of the scariest things to think about.
That is exactly right. And then combined with agents, like, yeah, sure, there's like a way for self-correction and then you impose some guardrail. And then I think it's now safe to say that with a proper agentic loop, like the sufficiently advanced model can achieve the goal eventually, but it's depending on how much.
Yeah. What is the eventually? How long is eventually?
Yeah, and the collateral damage.
Yeah.
in between that.
What do we break along the way?
Yeah. So the challenge now becomes, okay, how do you define correctness and then have it in a way that you can trust the machine to evaluate and then but also have the human in the loop to evaluate that result being correct.
How do you see the interplay between a lot of the conversations I've seen at the various conferences we've been attending have been LLMs to evaluate LLMs? Where would you see the human fitting in that? What's the relationship?
So LM as a judge is pretty common because it's not perfect, but it gives you a good baseline, right? That without a lot of expert involved in that. A couple of companies are doing fine-tuned LM as a judge that maybe the human will give some judgment for a couple of times, and then the fine-tuning loop learns that how a judge can be more effective. But I think this is like still emerging, and then there are probably going to be new practices. But one of the thing I'm seeing is that in kind of the data space, people often talk about, yeah, we need to like have the software engineering practice into the data workflow, right? And then what does that mean? I mean, a data workflow is more experimental. You do a lot of like exploration before you actually commit code or say that this is final, go.
Yeah, because
Like,
you're building an understanding. How can you code it if you don't understand what you're coding?
yeah, exactly. And then so that's been a constant debate for the past couple of years, like whether like data engineering is a subset of software engineering or a completely different practice, right? But what I found most intriguing is that the new type of software people are building is actually more experimental, right? So you are not like code up to a certain PRD anymore, right? You are like experimenting like how the software would behave, and then a lot of times that's you cannot like traditional software create exhaustive like tests to make sure it behaves in a certain way, but
Yep.
it's good enough to start with, right? And then that creates a very interesting question: what is the development cycle look like? But more fundamentally, the shelf life for software may be very different.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of discussion, right? I mean, you and I were talking about this earlier today about a new model gets released. What happens? You have GPT-4, now GPT-5 is out, right? Now you have to learn all over a new set of vibes. How is this going to impact the workflows that you're having there? How are you going to evaluate it?
Yeah. So like for example, if you have like a simple prompt or a agentic workflow that you are now switching the backend model. Now, of course, it will behave slightly or massively different,
Yeah.
right?
Essentially, your agent, your intern has redone all of their knowledge.
Exactly. And then now maybe you need to tune some of that prompts. But before doing that, how do you know which part of the task they're assigned to is now better or worse? Traditionally, software relies a lot on code review, where a lot of your peers is gonna nitpick your code, maybe not just for style, but like whether it covers edge cases or is like a good architecture for the desired workload. But for this type of new software, like that code review don't exist anymore, right? Because you don't critique other people's problems. Like maybe it's better for the next model. You don't know, right? So our thesis is really like the future is code review is going to be very much like data review. You care more about the input and output pair, and then how that underlying change of either prompt or model or the tool use or whatever you put the LN up to is now affected after you change the logic or the prompt. Like how is the input and output mapping? So that actually maps to a data problem where you have a bunch of input, you have a bunch of like transformation, or maybe if you instrument every tool use in between, how the end result can by all those kind of internal logic. So it creates kind of like it's almost like a data pipeline, right?
I mean, I would say it is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a different type of data,
Yep.
right? It's a lot of times people think about data as numbers, but it's really about information and variables.
Yeah.
It's interesting talking with you and, just working at Recce, which is it's very much coming from that software engineer that's getting into data engineering, right? That's translating that. Let's talk a little bit more about from the data space into the data engineering where it starts being a little bit more software engineering, right? Which granted is more of my background
Yeah.
coming from data scientist, self-taught data engineer. But I think it's a very different mindset. So I just love to hear in your words, how do you see that working?
So I mean, like in the community or like GovZero or other community, or when I met you, like people from data background, it's definitely very different mindset, right? And then the good ones really care about like the results. What are we using this data for? It's
It's
not
the so what. It's all about the
not
so what.
not
Yeah.
data for the data's sake, right? And then that's kind of a blind spot from a software engineering perspective, because we usually, okay, when we work on kind of the budget data or legislation data, we just want to make everything like friendly available, for like people with the domain knowledge can do analytics properly, right? So we don't necessarily have that problem intention. So we have this urge to make this data very clean
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
accessible, right? And then so that's why the computer community is awesome, that combines like two types of people and then work out what the data can actually create value about.
Yeah. I mean, to put it another way, it's like, okay, the structures matter, the code matters. But on the other side of the hand, when you're coming from a data background, it's really all about the data and what do I want to do with it. It's not so much like if the code worked this way or that way, I don't particularly care as long as it's efficient and within my compute pipelines and giving me what I want, right? That's what I need. What I want being either helping my stakeholder answer a question, helping us decide a product direction. Maybe it is the product. Some companies rate data as the product, making sure that that is clean, that it is something our customers expect and accurate.
Absolutely. That's where I find like people from like data background and then curiosity is kind of very key. It's like, what do you want to like do with this data? What can this potentially answer? Right. And then can we model the data or shape the data in a way that answers those questions?
Catch the corrupt politicians. Did they build the factory on the farmland?
Something like that. Or they use shadow companies to like combine donation above like what's legally allowed and so on.
Yeah, yeah. In the US, we don't need shadow corporations to do that. We talked a lot about, okay, what does 3.0 look like? What does it mean? How would you categorize that? Like, what would you call this age? We talked about, like, for example, 2.0 was DevOps. Like, what is this age? Like, what is the category that needs to be created or is being leaned more into?
I feel this is like kind of a super weird time, and it's about to get like even more weird, right? And then traditionally, like when we learn like computer science, like data structure, algorithm, there's like a saying, okay, program equals data structure plus algorithm, right? So you have a way to represent your data, and then you have a logic that process that represented data, and then boom, you put all those data in, then you have a program. Right. And then software 2.0 is a little bit weird because you don't actually have that code that is the runtime. As in, there's definitely still code doing training, right? But in kind of execution time, you are processing that model. So that kind of blurs the boundary between code and data. And then 3.0 is even more weird, right? Because that natural language do a lot of magic.
Yeah, literally a black box. So no one knows the model behind it.
And then here's the thing. Like when we do kind of a programming language, you kind of treat the code as part of the data, and then you turn that data, which is the source code, into something executable. And then just imagine that is now okay. You don't need specific DSL that represents a program. That natural language is a program. And then now the relationship between that program and what we expect that program to work is now more defined by data, right? These are the 1,000 golden data entries that I care about. Their behavior better be at least this, right?
So there's not yet a category. It sounds like it's still being defined. It's more of the software engineers are having to move more into the data mindset of the output and understanding the context of what they're building. And the data engineers are having to move a little bit more into the software engineering mindset, think a little bit more about structure and how to have a little bit more rigor in the things that they're building and when they build it.
Yeah. At the end of the day,
But not yet a word. Not yet a word.
No, it's I think it's definitely converging in the way that the reason is that so for purely data, you're mostly like you need to answer questions, right? But when we talk about data engineering, it's really like how do you effectively and repeatedly answer similar questions? So you have to kind of build out that infrastructure or representation about
Productionize answering the questions.
yeah. So there's that engineering practice that need to be put in. It's no longer ad hoc, but maybe enabling ad hoc, but you still have like a core foundation of what knowledge is represented within the organization.
So who at a company do you think with what we're talking about with software 3.0 and this intersection right now is either should be building this way, should start be thinking this way, or is thinking this way? Like what job title, role, or is it just a skill set?
I feel there's a lot of discussion on like how teams are able to build a lot faster. Like the traditional EPD, meaning like engineering, product, and design, kind of combine into like a single person can do a lot. Like, of course, they're probably not like expert in every field, but if they understand good chunk of that, what good looks like for the other principles, and then they can be super productive.
You can get to the good enough.
Yeah, so I think this is like a super interesting time. As in, like coming from kind of my background and then like competitive programming, we study like algorithms in high school, and then it already blew my mind when people were talking about like, oh, social media is controlling us through algorithms. Like it's like non-computer science people talk about algorithms is kind of weird enough in like about 10 years ago.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We gotta feed Daddy Algo. Yep.
Something along the line of like vibe coding. It's just like general public can now do this and talk about this. It's like super interesting.
Oh yeah. I was talking with so one of my cousins, she's a VP of data science at a mid-sized company. I think they do biotech. She was saying how she built out an entire workflow herself. The workflow being they used to have to be on top of their vendors. If their vendors fell behind a certain quota, they'd have to have a meeting and send them a warning, all of this stuff. She has built out herself, doesn't have any coding experience, right? She has an MBA, right? This is the type of background we're talking about. That now has automated that entire process of figuring out, the vendor's underperforming, sending the vendor an email, sending the warning, and if they don't respond appropriately, doing a follow-up or shifting their supply chain, right? That's something that was not possible at all, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and now
It is definitely enabling a lot. Like my wife is an author, and she wants to track kind of how her book is on the chart. And then so one day she was like vibe coding like a data collector, and then put it the cron job into GitHub Action. I was like, what are you doing? And she's like, I have no idea. The LLM tell me to open this file and then just put on all those weird things, and then it seems to work.
Oh, yeah. Which is like at the most basic level, getting at that so what that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, as we think through, like we've talked about, all right, how things are going today, democratizing that workflow, to use a overused word, but it does fit here, especially with the Gov Zero, just to pull that back in. Where do you think we're going to be in 5 years?
So many people mention that this is kind of the most normal time that we should remember, because it's gonna be like even more strange, right? And then when you think about that enabling, the scale of that enabling, like people can build things that previously would take a team. That there are like a couple of people mentioned about like a personal software. I'll just build out the thing. I don't need to even buy a SaaS or compare different options, right? And then that could work for myself and my friends, and very niche things. Maybe you want to have a pickable booking system that you just build out.
Hyper personalized software.
Exactly. But what's still like I'm still thinking is that even though that might not require such a production grade thing compared to the thing you want to serve a million users, right? What are kind of the basic testing that we can help the next generation of builder use and leverage, and then be confident about the things they build and ship, even though it's just shipping to themselves?
Yeah. So my cousin in 5 years' time would be able to do her own evals on these pipelines she doesn't understand. I mean, it's interesting because I think on one hand, there's this school of thought about, like what you're saying, like this is the most normal time we're going to live in. And it's just going to get crazier and will be more hyper personalized. But on the other hand, and I'm curious your thoughts here, we've also seen this massive consolidation of companies. How do you see potentially that working out, this interplay between, oh yeah, we can have everything personalized versus no one really wants to work. They want something ready-made. And the industry itself is starting to move more and more towards this consolidation.
It's a very broad question. There are a couple of thoughts or threads I can think of. So for personal software, it's really what's the effort for me to get something custom built that I can be confident about compared to all my efforts, like figuring out like what people are saying about my choices,
Mhm.
right? And then like I don't know, like finance tracker or everything. There's so many options. And then what if it's like easier to build one and then just like self-correct itself?
Finance tracker is such a good one. That's something I've been really wanting a better version of recently. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that tipping point will be that for majority use cases, people start to find like it's easier and cheaper. It's like ordering a breakfast, like ordering a piece of software that works most of the time for them. And then what might be interesting is what abstraction that type of software brings. What I mean by that is, does the software separate logic and data to the extent that the user can be confident that there might be something wrong with the logic, but if the data is correct, like we can correct that,
Yeah.
right? So what type of software being built by this kind of hyper personalized software can instill that confidence of the user? So I think that would be a key thing. And then when you say like consolidation, definitely this is kind of more traditional SaaS or
Mhm.
enterprise software. They're definitely like it's always like a pendulum. Like people wanted to buy one shop thing, and then in the time where there's a lot of shift in best practices or new demand or new ways of doing things, and there are like niche players like starting from like individual sectors, and so I think it's a continuous process, like where new things brought out and then got like consolidated, and then that's where we see so many interesting innovations.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so we've talked a lot today, kind of like ended up being me interviewing you a little bit. I hope that our listeners have enjoyed us on this journey. You know, our final couple minutes, like, why don't you talk a little bit about why we're doing this?
For the podcast, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's really like the industry improve in a interesting nonlinear way, and then the best step function is really usually important abstraction or a toolkit gets created that reshape how people think about the problem.
Yeah.
Because now we all know like LM has limited context and sort of human.
Yep,
So
yep.
when we have abstraction, we hold fewer concepts in our head. That means we can create like more complex things on top of that abstraction.
Get more creative, have more energy
Yeah,
into
you
space.
you, you have bigger building blocks to build things, and then
Yeah.
if they are like well designed and flexible, you end up like able to build things with less. And so our goal is really to interview builders and practitioners that think along this way, created critical parts of how we deal with our like data and software layer these days, and then talk through kind of their journey and then how. So usually you started off something to scratch your own age, and then
Yep,
and then,
yep.
and then sometimes it's pretty like unexpected that you kind of change the whole industry,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then just like I just enjoyed those kind of conversation, and then getting people to know more about this kind of hidden transformations in the industry.
Yeah. Well, I also think for a lot of people that aren't necessarily in the Bay Area, these are a lot of conversations that just being here, we get to have as part of the energy and living in this tech bubble. So being able to share this energy, the thoughts, and the discussions that we get to have here, our bubble both as early founder community and data space and San Francisco, I think it's really exciting, and hopefully, I expect people to learn a lot. I expect personally to learn a lot, and it's really exciting.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, we'll see if this ends up being the official outro, but at least for this first one, some initial questions. It's just going to be kind of rapid fire.
Yes.
First programming language you loved.
First programming I love is probably Perl.
Ooh, yep, early. Yep. What's the nerdiest thing you've automated in your life? What's the agent going to take over?
There was like a couple of years I was into home automation, and then there was like temperature sensor and then ceiling fan and then dehumidifier and all that. So like we got all that wired up.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was a couple of years ago, and then it was a good fun project.
So hardware automation. Got it.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
If you weren't a founder, what would you be doing?
I don't know. I can't think of it.
Yep, perfect answer. Perfect
Yeah,
answer. Our investors will love that. Yes. Okay. Tabs or spaces?
Oh, space.
Oh, okay. Don't look at my code. I'm a tab person. All right. And last question. What is your hottest take?
Okay, so this could be a little bit philosophical. So when I work on version control system and then realized that the innovation that Git brought was actually the content addressable storage, which means that each commit has a hash of the commit message, the actual content of the code, and the previous version of everything. So it's super elegant. And then that creates an interesting perspective that what if all this potential code that can be written already existed that we just don't know yet, right? It's like finding out those hashes, like what code tree and message, like kind of hash into that. Of course, this is like something super weird. And then, but if you think about like, there are a lot of like a great writer, they talk about their process of like writing. And then myself as a programmer, when I create something, oftentimes there's like weird moment that you just have some inspiration and do things. And then you can't help but think like, okay, if you concentrate and then like there's however you want to name it, it's the content soup or whatever that's giving you the idea for making this work, right? So if you think about the way that all the potential code is already there, we just need to uncover that.
Yeah.
And then it's of course really weird because it hasn't happened yet. But if you think about like above that time dimension,
Yeah.
and then that's kind of our mission to find what code that we should produce or uncover.
Like a universal tree of code.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like we need an edible for that answer. I'm for it. Awesome. Okay, well, that wraps up our first episode. I hope y'all enjoyed. Much more to come. We have an exciting guest lineup.
Yeah. Until then, keep building.
Keep building.
That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on datarenegades.com. Data Renegades is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in enterprise infrastructure. For more information, visit heavybit.com.